In this lesson, we continue working in the buttons.html file with the 3 buttons to add new CSS declarations. First, download the necessary files from the video description. Open the folder Lesson 3 in VS Code. Then, click on the buttons.html file and let's now open the live server. I have included a link in the buttons.html file to a page that contains the final version of the buttons. When I access the link, the page opens in a new window because I used the target attribute with the value _blank, which we discussed in the previous lesson. This is how the buttons should look by the end of this lesson. Let's start with what is very evident that needs to be done. The buttons are too close to each other. I will use the margin property to space the buttons apart. I will add a right margin to the Google button. Margin right, 20 pixels. And a left margin to the Amazon button. Margin left, 20 pixels. I have added space outside the 2 buttons. Next, I notice that the button's text needs to be modified. I will add the word search for the Google button. And search the web for the Yahoo button. And I messed them both up. This happened because I set a fixed value for both height and width. To solve the problem, we need to remove the 2 lines width and height that we attached to the .btn class, which applies to all buttons. Instead of deleting them entirely, I'll show you how to deactivate them. Position the cursor at the end of the width property and press Ctrl+//. Doing the same for height, thus commenting out and deactivating the 2 lines. Similarly, we can insert comments or short explanations in the code. I will write above the .btn class, general styles, and press Ctrl+//. If I open this file again after some time and look at the code, I will know exactly what the code below does. It styles multiple buttons in an identical way. We notice that after deactivating the width and height, the text inside the buttons seems squished. If earlier I added space outside the buttons using the margin property, now I will add space inside the buttons using a property called padding. Padding top, 10 pixels. Padding right, 20 pixels. Padding bottom, 10 pixels. Padding left, 20 pixels. Now, Google button looks much better. I will do the same for the other buttons, but I won't write as much. I will use the shorthand form. The values for padding are added clockwise, starting from the top and ending on the left. For the simplified form, we have no less than 4 options. As you can see, for padding we can specify 4 values, 1 for each side, 2 values, 3 values, or a single value. Depending on the situation, we can choose the most suitable option from these 4. Let's add padding to the other 2 buttons. Padding, 10 pixels for top and bottom, 20 pixels for left and right. Much better, except the Yahoo button is a bit taller, which I don't quite like. Fortunately, I know why this happens. It is taller because it has something extra compared to the other two buttons. If we look at the code, we notice that it has a border, a 2-pixel border. Let's open the developer tools to see what happens. I press the F12 key. Click on the small square with an arrow, then click on the Yahoo button and open the Computed tab. We are discussing the CSS box model, a simple but fundamental concept in CSS that defines how elements are displayed on a page. The CSS box model includes the following components: content, the area where text, images, or other types of content are displayed. Padding, the space between the content and the border. Border, the area that surrounds the padding and content. Here you can see that the Yahoo button has a 2-pixel border and is therefore slightly taller than the other two. And, finally, margin, the outer space between the border and other elements. All these components work together to determine the size and appearance of each element on a web page. Another thing I want to show you is that all elements on a web page are actually boxes. I will use the universal selector, a special selector that targets absolutely all elements, to add a red border to all elements on the page as follows: asterisk, curly braces, border, 2 pixels, solid, red. We can easily see at least 3 boxes, 2 large boxes. The outer one is the HTML element, the inner one is the body element, and another smaller box containing a link. Now, to make the Yahoo button have the same height as the other two, we need to reduce the padding at the top and bottom by 2 pixels. Padding, 8 pixels, for top and bottom. Let's move on and discuss pseudoclasses. Pseudoclasses in CSS are keywords added to selectors that specify a special state of the selected elements. They can be used to style elements based on their state, position, or user interaction. I created a small example to help you understand what pseudoclasses are, and I will click on the file name, pseudoclasses.html. In Explorer, right-click on the file name and choose Open with Live Server. As you can see, we have an anchor element with a link to Google and a series of CSS rules. The first pseudoclass is link, and it applies to unvisited links, as it is the initial state of a link before we click on it. For this state, I styled the text to be yellow, as you can see. Then we have visited, the pseudoclass for visited links. This will be purple. Let's click on the link to see if I'm right. The link is now purple. Next is the pseudoclass for the hover state. When the user hovers over the element, the text will be green. In this way, you can add interactive effects, such as changing the color, exactly what I did in this example, increasing the size, transitions, and many other effects. And finally, the active pseudoclass, used for the active state when the element is clicked. The text will be red. I have also included the focus pseudoclass, which is particularly useful for form fields and is especially visible when navigating using the keyboard. In this example, I applied an orange outline to the text. If I press the Tab key repeatedly, I will see this outline. These pseudo-classes must be written in the exact order presented here. A good way to remember the correct order is to remember the two words love and hate, which refer to link, visited, hover, and active. It is not mandatory to always use all four pseudo-classes. The most frequently used ones are hover and active. Looking at the reference, we notice that in the hover state, the button has a faded color and the text becomes black. And if I click to see the active state, the color becomes even more faded. Also, I notice that the transition from one state to another is not abrupt. It is smooth. Let's do the same thing right now. .bt in Google :hover. Opacity 0.7. Color $000. Margin 5 pixels. .bt in Google :active. Opacity 0.5. The opacity property is used to set the transparency level of an element. The value of this property ranges from 0 to 1, where 0 means completely transparent and 1 means completely opaque. This property can be applied to any HTML element, including images, text, and content blocks. Let's see what we have achieved. I deliberately added a margin of 5 pixels to demonstrate that using properties that add space can cause layout issues. In general, we manipulate color, opacity, or add different visual effects. So I will comment out this line. To make the transition from one state to another state, I will use the transition property for color and opacity as follows. Transition, color, 1 second, comma, opacity, 1 second. The transition property is used to create transition effects when the CSS property values of an element change. This allows for the application of linear and animated transitions between two states of an element, making style changes more attractive and easier to follow. If we check the result, we observe that, once the cursor leaves the button, the slow transition no longer has any effect. The transition should always be written alongside the basic declarations that style the button or any other HTML element, because if we attach it to the hover pseudo-class, it will not work entirely. So, I will move the declaration where it needs to be and reduce the time because, in general, transitions should take place in at most half a second. I forgot to do something very obvious, which is to change the color of the buttons. Let's do that right now, and I'll show you how to choose the exact color directly from the developer tools. I will select the Google button, and then click on the Styles tab. I will select the background color, copy it, and paste it in VS Code. I will do the same for all the buttons. Let's add the two pseudo classes to the other buttons. We look at the Yahoo button and observe that, in the hover state, the background color and text color change, and in the active state, the text color changes again. We will do the same. .btn Yahoo, hover, background color. I'm going to copy the exact color from Developer Tools. Color, number sign, FFF. And now for active state. .btn Yahoo active, color, number sign, 000. Transition, background, 0.4 second. Comma, color, 0.4 second. Border, 0.4 second. Let's check if we got the same result. Yes, everything seems to be fine. And finally, we come to the Amazon button. This button has a shadow that appears at the bottom right in the hover state and moves to the opposite side in the active state. To achieve this, I will use the box shadow property. .btn Amazon, hover. I'm going to copy the exact color from Developer Tools. I select the Amazon button and I'm going to copy the color. I can't find it. I can't see the hover state for Amazon button. There could be several reasons why we are not seeing the CSS code for hover or active in Developer Tools. Fortunately, I know how to solve the problem. In the window on the left, I will right-click on the HTML code that corresponds to the Amazon button and choose the Force State option. Then select Hover. Now we can see the code for the hover state and we can copy the color. Actually, I have a better idea. Let's copy the entire rule and paste it twice. Now, for the active state, I'm going to make only the necessary changes. I'll replace hover with active. To move the shadow to the opposite side, we need to change the first two values to be negative, like this. Let's check if everything is okay. It's very good. We did a good job. But we still have something to do. We need to add a transition for the shadow. In this example we're working on, we can add the transition much more simply in one line. Instead of adding a transition for each button, I'll write a single declaration and attach it to the .btn class, like this. Transition, all, 0.4 seconds. Let's remove all the other transitions and check if everything is okay. I created an example where I explain box shadow, so let's open boxshadow.html with live server. We have a simple blue box with some shadows. If we look at the code, we see that there are 5 values. We only added 4. Let me explain. The first value is for the horizontal distance of the shadow. The second value is for the vertical distance of the shadow. The third value is for the degree of blur of the shadow. The fourth value is for the expansion of the shadow. And finally, the fifth value is for the color. Before we end this lesson, I suggest we do a little cleaning and remove everything that is not necessary. I'm going to delete this rule, these 2 declarations, and this one as well. Now, I'm going to right-click and choose the Format Document option. Now, everything is fine. This concludes the 3rd lesson, which I believe was a bit more difficult, increasing the volume of information slightly, but wait until you see what's next. My advice is to start practicing on your own, using the information you've received so far to create and style various elements. Even if something extraordinary doesn't come out, at least you will be able to memorize most of the information better. In the next lesson, we will learn to style text using CSS. Happy learning!